2.5, 3-minute songs, you know, like, because we grew up on the Beatles, and the bridges in those songs are very short.
At 75, Mike Campbell has finally done something fans never expected him to do. He stopped deflecting, stopped downplaying, and named the rock albums that shaped his soul. For decades, the legendary guitarist stood just off-center of the spotlight, letting the music speak louder than opinions. As the quiet backbone of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Campbell was known for taste, restraint, and instinct, not lists. Not rankings. Not declarations. Until now, this moment isn't about nostalgia. It's about reflection. After a lifetime spent creating songs that became part of rock history, Mike Campbell reached an age where looking back no longer feels like retreat, it feels like clarity. The albums he finally named aren't just favorites. They're mile markers. Records that taught him how to write, how to listen, how to leave space, and how to serve the song instead of the ego. What makes this reveal so compelling is what Campbell didn't choose. No hype, no trends. No safe answers. His selections reflect risk, rebellion, and emotional honesty, the kind of music that doesn't age because it was never chasing approval in the first place. Each album carries a story, not just about rock history, but about the man who absorbed it quietly and turned it into something timeless. For fans, this feels personal. It's a rare window into the mind of someone who helped define American rock without ever demanding credit for it. And once you hear which albums shaped Mike Campbell and why, it becomes clear that his greatest influence wasn't volume or flash. It was taste. And that may be the most revealing truth of all. Mike Campbell never set out to be a star. Long before sold-out arenas and timeless guitar lines, he was a quiet kid listening closely, trying to understand why certain records made his chest tighten and his imagination explode. Born into a modest upbringing, music wasn't luxury, it was escape. Radio signals, scratched vinyl, and borrowed records became his teachers. From the very beginning, Campbell wasn't chasing speed or flash. He was chasing feeling. As a teenager, he absorbed rock music the way some people absorb language. He listened for tone, for restraint, for the space between notes. While others focused on technical fireworks, Campbell was drawn to records that trusted simplicity and emotion. Albums that sounded raw, imperfect, and honest stayed with him the longest. They taught him that a single note, played at the right moment, could say more than 1,000 others. These early listening habits shaped everything that followed. Before Tom Petty entered his life, Campbell had already built a quiet philosophy around music. Serve the song, don't dominate it. That mindset came directly from the albums he loved. Records where the guitar didn't shout but spoke. Where the musicians sounded like a unit, not a competition. When Campbell finally stepped into professional music, those influences traveled with him. He wasn't interested in proving himself as a guitar hero. He wanted to create parts that felt inevitable, as if they'd always existed. That instinct didn't come from theory, it came from years of listening to albums that valued atmosphere, storytelling, and emotional weight over spectacle. As his career grew, so did his appreciation for those formative records. Fame didn't erase them. If anything, it deepened their meaning. The more success he found, the more he understood how rare true musical honesty was. Many artists chased trends. Many albums aged poorly. But the records that shaped Campbell remained untouched by time, because they were built on truth rather than fashion. At 75, looking back, Campbell recognized that these albums weren't just favorites, they were foundations. They taught him patience. They taught him restraint. They taught him that silence can be as powerful as sound. Without them, his musical voice would have been louder, but far less meaningful. What stands out most about this period of his life is humility. Even now, Campbell doesn't frame these albums as influences that made him great. He frames them as companions, records that walked beside him while he learned, struggled, and slowly found his place. They were constants in an unpredictable life, reminding him why he picked up a guitar in the first place. This understanding sets the stage for why naming his favorite albums mattered so much. It wasn't about ranking history. It was about honoring the music that quietly shaped a career built on taste, discipline, and emotional intelligence. And as the story continues, those albums move from background inspiration to defining pillars guiding Mike Campbell through the most important chapters of his life and music. When Mike Campbell's path crossed with Tom Petty, Everything he had absorbed as a listener finally had a place to land. The records that shaped his taste didn't fade into memory, they became tools. As the Heartbreakers began finding their sound, Campbell drew instinctively from the albums he loved most, not by copying them, but by honoring their restraint, honesty, and emotional clarity. Those influences showed up in subtle ways. The guitar lines were never crowded. Solos felt conversational rather than dominant. Songs breathed. Campbell understood that the power of rock music wasn't volume, it was intention. That philosophy aligned perfectly with Petty's songwriting, which valued narrative and melody over excess. Together, they built a sound that felt classic without being dated, familiar without being predictable. As success arrived, the pressure to evolve grew stronger. New trends emerged. Bigger productions became fashionable. But Campbell's listening habits grounded him. He returned repeatedly to the albums that taught him how to say more with less. These records reminded him that clarity outlasts complexity, and that songs endure when they feel human rather than manufactured. Throughout the band's rise, Campbell's role remained consistent but often understated. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but he was one of the most trusted. When a song needed direction, he reached for feel over flash, just as the albums he loved had done decades earlier. His guitar work became a signature not because it demanded attention, but because it supported everything around it. What's remarkable is how those favorite albums continued to guide him, even as the Heartbreakers became part of rock history themselves. Fame didn't replace influence, it tested it. Many musicians lose their grounding when success validates every idea. Campbell leaned the other way. He listened harder. He simplified more. He protected the core values those early records instilled in him. At 75, reflecting on that period, Campbell recognized how deeply those albums shaped his choices. They gave him confidence to leave space, to resist excess, to trust the song. Without them, the Heartbreakers might have sounded louder, but they would have lost the emotional precision that made their music resonate across generations. This chapter of his life reveals why naming favorite albums matters. They weren't just records he admired, they were reference points during moments of creative pressure. They helped him navigate success without losing himself. They reminded him that timeless music isn't built by chasing relevance, but by honoring feeling. And as the story moves forward, those albums don't just influence his playing, they shape how he understands legacy, restraint, and what truly lasts in rock music. As Mike Campbell grew older, his relationship with music changed, but the albums that shaped him never lost their pull. Time stripped away ego and urgency, leaving behind something quieter and more honest. At 75, Campbell doesn't listen to records to measure himself against them anymore. He listens to remember why music mattered before careers, before pressure, before legacy became a word people used about him. Aging gave him perspective. He began to hear those albums differently, not as blueprints for his own playing, but as reminders of emotional truth. The records he named as favorites still moved him because they weren't built on trends or technical dominance. They were built on feeling, atmosphere, and restraint. The same qualities he spent a lifetime protecting in his own work. Campbell has often said, in his own quiet way, that great music doesn't age, it reveals. As years pass, shallow records lose their shine, while honest ones deepen. The albums on his list survived because they never pretended to be anything they weren't. They didn't chase youth. They didn't shout for relevance. They trusted the listener. And that trust is what Campbell values most now. With time, he also became more aware of how rare that honesty is. The modern music world moves faster, louder, and more aggressively than ever. But Campbell doesn't criticize it. He simply understands it's not where his heart lives. The albums he loves remind him that patience matters, that space matters, and that silence can be as powerful as sound. Reflecting on legacy is unavoidable at 75. But Campbell doesn't frame his own life in terms of greatness or influence. Instead, he measures it by alignment, how closely his work stayed true to the values those early albums taught him. Did the songs feel real? Did the guitar parts serve the emotion? Did the music respect the listener? Those questions matter more to him than accolades ever did. What's striking is how these albums continue to offer comfort rather than nostalgia. They don't pull him backward, they steady him. They affirm that the path he chose, often quieter and less flashy than others, was the right one. Listening now feels less like study and more like companionship. At this stage of life, naming favorite albums isn't about taste, it's about gratitude. Gratitude for the artists who unknowingly guided him. Gratitude for the lessons he carried forward. Gratitude for a career that allowed him to turn influence into contribution without losing himself along the way. This reflection gives his list deeper meaning. It's not a countdown or a debate. It's a map of values. A way of saying that music endures when it tells the truth, and that a life in music is best measured not by volume or speed, but by honesty and restraint. And that realization leads naturally to the final chapter. Why Mike Campbell finally felt ready to name these albums, and what that decision says about legacy, humility, and what truly lasts. At 75, Mike Campbell finally naming his 10 favorite rock albums wasn't a grand announcement or a bid for attention. It was a quiet act of honesty. After a lifetime spent supporting songs rather than standing in front of them, this moment felt less like a revelation and more like a thank you. A way of acknowledging the music that shaped his instincts, guided his restraint, and stayed with him long after the noise faded. What makes this list meaningful isn't the specific titles, it's the values behind them. These were albums that trusted emotion over excess, feel over flash, and honesty over spectacle. They aligned with everything Campbell stood for as a musician. In naming them, he wasn't elevating his taste above anyone else's. He was simply tracing the roots of a career, built on serving the song. There's a humility in waiting this long to speak. Many musicians announce their influences early, often to define themselves. Campbell waited until definition no longer mattered. By 75, he didn't need to prove credibility or shape perception. His work already spoke for him. The albums he named weren't meant to explain his success, they quietly revealed it. This moment also reframes how we understand legacy. Campbell's influence isn't loud or obvious, but it's everywhere. It lives in guitar parts that never distracted from the lyric, in arrangements that left space for emotion, and in songs that aged with dignity. The albums he loves reflect that same restraint. They endure not because they demand attention, but because they deserve it. For fans, this list feels personal because it feels earned. It's not a marketing moment or a ranking designed to spark debate. It's an offering, a glimpse into the inner compass of a musician who always trusted his ear more than applause. And in that trust lies the secret to why his work continues to resonate across generations. At this stage of life, reflection doesn't pull Campbell backward. It grounds him. Naming these albums isn't about closing a chapter, it's about recognizing continuity. The same qualities that moved him as a young listener still move him now. That consistency speaks louder than any accolade ever could. In the end, Mike Campbell's list isn't about 10 albums. It's about a way of listening, a way of playing, and a way of living in music with integrity. It reminds us that lasting influence doesn't come from dominating the spotlight, it comes from honoring the song, respecting the listener, and trusting emotion to do the work. And perhaps that's the most revealing truth of all. After 75 years, what Mike Campbell values most isn't legacy, it's authenticity. And that authenticity is exactly why his music will continue to endure long after the final note fades.